Welcome to Season 4 of the Charity Matters podcast. I'm Heidi Johnson, lifelong helper, nonprofit founder, and your host. I've been interviewing the helpers for a decade with my blog, and I'm so excited to now be sharing these inspiring conversations on our podcast. Join me as we learn the challenges and the stories of innovators, entrepreneurs, and modern-day heroes who set out to solve the problems of humanity. Is it really possible for one person to make a difference? To change the world? Today's guest, Don Schoendorfer's story, proves that it is. Join us to hear how one MIT biomedical engineer invented a wheelchair to bring mobility to millions without them. So excited to have Don Schoendorfer from the Free Wheelchair joining us today to share his journey with starting his nonprofit and the incredible work that he's world. So welcome, Don. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you, Heidi, for having me here. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
I am too. I'm really excited. I've actually heard about you and read about you over the years as someone who is kind of a nonprofit founder, groupie. There's not many of us, but I'm one of them. I have heard about you. And so I really am very excited to not only learn more about your journey, but to share it with our audience today. So before we begin, why don't you just tell us a little bit, very simply, what Free Wheelchair Mission does for those that don't know about your work?
Well, we've designed and found how to get manufactured an inexpensive, durable, functional wheelchair that we provide for free to people in developing countries who need a wheelchair.
And there's a lot. How many people are around the globe that are in need, by your estimates, that are in need of a wheelchair?
We rely on WHO, World Health Organization's estimate of 75 million people in need of a wheelchair.
That's an unbelievable number when you really think about it. And I know I've read a little bit about your background. And for me, living in Pasadena, being a Caltech person, I'm always kind of fascinated by people that go to Caltech and MIT, because there's in our city, there's a level of respect for the brilliance of what it takes to go to those institutions. And growing up in a city that has a college like that, it's a very special thing. And you are an MIT alumni, so I'm going to take a gander that when you started your journey in college, that maybe this wasn't the line of work that you were intending. What was your kind of initial path where you thought you were going with your life and your work around after college or during college?
Well, my father worked in the railroad for 49 years as a machinist, and two older brothers. One was a chemical engineer, one's a civil engineer. And I just knew from the way we operated at home, we always just took things apart and fixed them and put them back together, and that I would be an engineer. And I just chose mechanical. And but my real goal was to make a lot of money, like $1 billion, just for the heck of it. Let's pick a number, because I'm not good at asking people for help. Back then I had no idea what I was going to do with the $1 million, but I knew I was going to do something to help people.
So you always kind of had a sense that you were a helper.
Yes.
That's a beautiful thing, because I don't think everybody thinks that. I mean, I do think when I've interviewed hundreds of nonprofit founders, but not one of them has ever said when they were young, they said, when I grow up, I want to start a nonprofit. Everyone has said they might have known that they were a helper or not, but they didn't really know what that meant. So you were at MIT, you're getting your degree in engineering, and share with us the journey, the path that led you to this, because it's a pretty incredible story.
Yeah, well, two older brother, we were a modest family, and my mother and father did everything they could to get my two brothers through college. And they had a discussion with me. I guess I was 8 or 9 years old, and they kind of laid the cards on the table that, listen, we may not have a lot of money left over to help you getting through college. So just don't plan on that. And we notice you're not working very hard at school, and you're just barely getting by, and you're in like the middle kind of group that you're headed for a vocation now. You you're not saving anything either. I mean, if you're at your 8 years old, how much can you save, right? But they said you
Right.
better start doing something to save up for going to college if you really want to go to it, like your other brothers did. Uh, and that was sort of a wow. I guess so. I learned how to just be a better student, and I wasn't motivated before. It wasn't like I couldn't be a better student. I just wasn't. I was more fun than just down in the basement building little things and just dinkering around. And so I started to focus, and I got to be a pretty good student. And I started to save as a paper boy, for 10 years, peddling papers, and I got good grades, and I got a scholarship to go to a liberal arts school in Ohio, Baldwin Wallace, and they had a plan to go to Columbia. I could go there 3 years, and then I could go to Columbia University in New York and get a bachelor's degree. But then I go back again, maybe when I'm 10 or 11 years old, I found out about MIT, and the reputation there was, in fact, then I think Cal wasn't a big school, and they were writing, of course, this was the New York Times too. They say MIT was the best technical school in the world.
Right.
So I just set my sights. I said, I want to go there.
Wow.
But I knew I wasn't going to get there from my school, the high school I was going to in Ohio. No offense, but I knew who I was going to be competing with as a candidate for that school. So I was very
the brightest in the world are going to, the most elite.
Well, the nerdiest. They may not be bright in many things, but
you said that. I did it.
I got my fill of liberal arts at Baldwin Wallace, and then Columbia is not going to let you get out no matter what your degree you're going to specialize in without a good liberal arts background.
Right,
and that was I appreciate that too, but then I said, well, okay, now I've got good grades from Columbia. I'm going to apply to MIT, and I applied to 3 or 4 other universities and colleges at the same time. But and then my dream came true. I got accepted at MIT, and again, no one had a lot of money, but they were so generous in granting Baldwin Wallace, Columbia, and MIT, full scholarships.
Wonderful.
And it was, and I appreciated it then, but I had no way of putting in the perspective of how that meant. And now I look back at it, it wouldn't have been possible.
Right. Well, and it always feels that way. I put myself through college, and I had to work to put myself through school, and it didn't seem possible that I was going to be able to do it at the time when my parents told me that there were not resources, and somehow we all make it happen. We do this, and you have incredible pride in your diploma and your degree when you achieve things you don't think are possible. I think it makes it that much more rewarding for all of us. So you have a career in engineering. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I said, and then you've been fighting for something for not just 4 years, but your whole life.
Right.
So you do encounter hurdles, and the fact that you've been fighting your whole life, you know how to deal with some of these hurdles because you're not going to give up after all these years of fighting.
And you realize the hurdles are the gift, right? You don't think that at the time, but you realize in hindsight, when you look back, like each hurdle was a gift. It was a lesson in resilience, a lesson in something.
Yeah.
Every last one of them.
After you pick yourself up and then dust yourself off, you realize.
Exactly. So you had a career in engineering. I'm going to take a gander. Is that what you were doing?
For mechanical engineering.
And so tell us the story, because almost everyone that I've talked to can tell me the moment, which is what's so fascinating, because nonprofit founders we're a unique group, that we are, we're all hard workers. We're all entrepreneurs. We may not realize it at the time when we start these journeys, but something happens to us, and it's whether you want to call it a divine moment or whatever you want to call it. Those moments are like lightning bolts for almost everyone I've interviewed, and they can tell you the moment, what happened that changed the course of everything, whether it's considered a roadblock or hurdle or whatever you want to call it, but the moment that everything kind of changed. So share with us a little bit about what that was for you.
Well, I got out of MIT, and I found a place I could work and be a good individual contributor. Blood cell separating technology was just coming out in '79, in a big way, and 77 I got out of school, started off a couple of years, working hard. My wife working hard to raise enough money to buy a house, raise a family, advance our careers, and we went on a vacation to Morocco. And that was probably not a good thing to do in many respects, because we didn't have any money to spend there. And Morocco is a beautiful country, but to live comfortably, safely, you do have to be prepared to spend money. And but the first day we were there in a city called Tetron. We were in the Medina, which is a very small, very old part of the city, probably built during the Crusades. And it was dirt road, buildings close to each other, just wide enough for a wagon and a donkey to get by, not for a car. But between the legs of people just commuting back and forth on foot, this woman drags herself across the road using her fingernails for traction.
Oh.
And she's looking at her hands. She's not looking at anything else but her hands. And she's very careful about how she places them. And she's advancing, but her feet are just dragging behind her, like they're almost like they're just connected to her. They're not functioning in any way. And she's bleeding, and she's very filthy, and her clothes are torn. But I had to think, maybe some of this was thinking back, but what she was thinking about, I believe, was, don't step on me. Please don't step on me. And please don't let that wagon run over me.
Wow.
And we're looking around as totally new to this whole thing. This is pretty much the first trip in a developing country, and shocked at that appearance, but also shocked at the fact that people were just basically just stepping over her like she was some kind of garbage, but not helping her. And
Wow.
And because it was, when I look back now, people explain to me, well, that's what people saw every day there, and that's life, and there's a whole lot of reasons why they can justify it. But and she just kind of crawled across this dirt and then disappeared down an alley, and like, where'd that come from? We're here on a vacation to be educated and enjoy our time, and we start off with this first thing, and like Americans, you want to, let's go do something about it. We got to find a wheelchair around her someplace. Obviously, she had hands; she could use a wheelchair with her arm. She'd be strong enough to do that, but there was nothing like that available, even no matter how much money you had. And so, okay, now it's time to end the vacation, go on home, continue your advancement in your career, and you're raising your family, and that's what I did for 20 more years. But every now and then, something would remind me, or in the middle of the night, I'd wake up and I'd be thinking about that woman and the peril she had just to keep alive. Yeah. And so
and she haunted you. She kind of haunted you.
I probably would have died with that image in my mind had it not been for raising teenage daughters.
Interesting. And why and how? Explain the correlation.
Well, at MIT, at Caltech, you get the feeling for they can really try to explain the universe, and they still can't get to the point where they can explain where it all came from. And I always said, well, I was brought up a Christian, and I was willing to give God credit for that, because I don't see any other way it could happen. But I figured, I'm on my own here, and I was actually pretty good as an engineer, solving very difficult technical problems with my education and my background. But suddenly you reach teenage daughter problems. and that's not something engineers know anything about at all.
That's something that no one knows anything about.
And and it kind of brought us back to church, brought us back to on our knees to learn how to surrender those issues, because there's not something that we could solve.
No.
And
teenage girls are not solvable until they're no longer teenagers.
Right. And you realize the object of a parent is to keep your sons and daughters alive until they mature enough to keep themselves alive.
Right. You hope.
Yeah. So then being the fact that I was going back to church, I figured I go a couple of years, but I'm still the same guy on Monday as I was on Saturday, and church maybe make me think differently a little about things for one day, but I wasn't getting anything worse. So I was a pedestrian. So I thought, well, I can, with a PhD at MIT, I can teach people math and science. And so I'd be volunteer as a tutor, right? And these poor kids, they were from Central America, and all they're being done is being moved on to the next grade, no matter what.
Right.
And then mentoring. I tried mentoring kids that they're in and out of parole, and sleeping in the back seats of cars, and sometimes in jail, and that. And the way I like to shorten the story, because I could.
You went on a philanthropic journey a little bit.
Yeah, but I like to put it in these very briefly. This happened over the period of 6 months, but I can make it real short. Hello, this is the middle of the night, it wakes you up in the phone at the middle of the night, rings, and then it said, Don. Yeah. And I say, yeah, this is the Lord. And
That's a call you don't usually get in the middle of the night.
I need to talk to you. And what about? And he said, well, why are you wasting your time? And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, you're not cut out to be a tutor or a mentor. You don't like people. You're an introvert. You have no training in this area. Why don't you use the gifts I gave you to do something for the kingdom? And then he hung up, and not granted, I don't want anybody to misinterpret. I do not have that kind of relationship with communicating with Lord. but if I summed up what was going through
direct info is good.
If I'm thinking of what I was going through for those 6 months, that was really what I came up with. Hey, I'm an engineer. I'm an inventor. I can do this stuff. Where do I focus my energy? And then all of a sudden there's this woman crawling across the dirt road.
And the dots begin to connect.
And it's like, what's he need? What's she need? Well, the wheelchair has it's odd. The ingredients is in the name, wheelchair.
Yeah.
And so I figured, I was doing clinical trials, and I was getting things through the FDA, and I knew how to do a clinical trial. So I figured, if I could come up with some kind of a design, maybe I could write a paper and prove that this would work. And I'm, and I'd written quite a few papers.
And what year is this, Don? What year is this?
This 1999.
Okay.
And so I go to Toys R Us, and I get some bicycles, and I go to Home Depot right next door, and I get some light resin lawn chairs, and then it spends 5 or 6 months trying to figure out how to effectively connect them together. And it's a wet resin lawn chair with mountain bike tires, and it doesn't look like a wheelchair to most anybody. But I'm thinking that woman probably would love to have something like this.
Of course.
So and I get a lot of support from people that are in the mission field and the humanitarian field, and they said, what do you want to do next? I said, I want to write a paper, the safety and efficacy of an inexpensive, durable, functional wheelchair in the developing world. That was the title. And I'm going to do a little clinical trial, right? I'm going to make 100 of these things. I'm going to get them out somehow, and I'm going to come back a year later and see if the wheels are still turning. And I'd write this paper, and then someone else could take care of it, because that would be my contribution.
Right.
And so I did all those things, and faced a lot of criticism along the way, healthy criticism along the way, because people were trying to make me realize that I was wasting my time and my talents.
Isn't that funny how people always do that with people have great ideas, or entrepreneurs? It seems to be a trait we all get feedback on that.
And this was, way out of my league. I didn't know anything about physiology or physical therapy, occupational therapy, or international diseases and tropical diseases or any other stuff. But you're a
problem solver, Don. You're a problem solver.
And so I made 100 of them, and I was able to get, after sitting in the garage for another year, and I was able to get 4 of them on a mission trip to India, and managed to to convince people just to tolerate me. I just want to prove a point because no one could understand where this was going. Just it made no sense to anybody.
Well, it came a little bit. They didn't know about your phone call, and it came a little out of the blue,
No,
I'm sure, for other people who aren't
right.
following the whole story that we're getting. But yes,
Yeah.
I
And
can
in
see that.
India, in a city, you can't walk more than 100 feet without seeing somebody sitting on the ground, crawling on the ground, rolling on the ground or whatever, or being carried. It's just so common. So that was a great place to start. And we brought the 4 wheelchairs with us, 4 passengers on an international flight. And the first one we gave away, we just saw a family's life change in a matter of seconds. It was just unbelievable. I know so many questions were asked. People would try to say, who's going to, they'd ask me in trying to talk me out of it. Well, who's going to give them away? Who's going to do the training? How are you going to be sure they get to the right people? Where are they going to be made? All these other things. And I just want to see what happens.
Right. You just wanted to see if they worked and if it was the right fit. That was it.
And I had to get some data, I thought, because I had to write this paper. But when I saw this family change, it wasn't data that I needed. I needed to be able to figure out how to tell the story.
Yeah.
You can imagine if you were carrying in this case was an 11-year-old boy with cerebral palsy, and they had carried him every day of his life, and they both can't work, and therefore they can't make enough. They can just barely make enough money to live on because one of them has to stay with their son.
Right.
And all of a sudden they got this chair that they can take, and they can take them to the shade along the rice paddies where they worked, and they could both work and they could make enough money to, advance a little bit in their economy. But they had the freedom, and now he had freedom and they had freedom. And of course, they didn't know what was going to happen after we put him in the chair. They probably thought we were going to take some pictures and take it away from him. And when we drove away at the end of, and left the chair to them, they got it. Because we didn't come back and take the chair.
Right.
And it was like, and it was like, okay, that's enough. That's a story. What kind of data do you need for me to convince you this is a good thing?
Well, you're kind of jumping ahead a little bit because I was going to ask you about your impact, and I'm going to get back to that. So just remember this. I'm going to come back to impact and we'll talk about it, because I think sometimes one of the challenges we have in nonprofits is that a lot of people want to know the return on investment. A lot of people want to know about all sorts of data. They want to have serve and help. And how do you measure that impact like what you just shared with us? That's immeasurable. You can't measure the impact of that child in that family's life of what just happened. It's an immeasurable impact. It is a data point, but it's so much more than a data point. And I think that it's something that we struggle with a little bit
Yes.
in this line of work, so to speak. It's one of the struggles. Well, I have a question for you, because people are asking you all these questions about how are you going to distribute this? How is this going to be? And at this point, you don't even think it's a business. So when did you decide it was going to become a nonprofit, and what were those early challenges like? It sounds like distribution might have been one of them.
Well, curiously enough, it didn't, because after the mission group that we worked with to get to this boy in the first place in Chennai, India, saw how this opened the doors for them. The next day, they're driving me all around Chennai to show me all the disabled people that they would like to get wheelchairs to, because they got the doors open in this little village, in this Hindu village. And so, and they want to be distribution partners. And I didn't ever think what will I need a distribution partner for?
Right.
So I just wanted to fast forward. But the thing that made kind of another, I used to call them coincidences, because I wasn't really into how much God was behind this whole thing. But
there are no coincidences. We all know that.
I get back to California, and I'm telling my family this story, and some people from the church this story. And I go to work that Monday morning, and the parking lot's empty, and the doors are locked. And I knock on the door, and my boss comes out, and he said, "Haven't you heard?" And I said, "No, I've been in India for 2 weeks now." He said, "Well, we just went bankrupt last week," and I didn't have a job.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Hey.
And okay. Oh, okay. No, it's another coincidence, right?
Right.
And so I'm started struggling because my wife was a stay-at-home mom, and my kids they had fairly expensive medical costs, and I'm trying to put pieces together. But this news of this wheelchair, just the four we gave away in Chennai, had tremendous stories. I mean, I could spend hours just telling you those stories, and they got back to the people at my church and other people who knew me, and they'd call and said, "What are you going to do next, Don?" I said, "Well, I'm a biomedical engineer, and I got all this background in sweat and blood and all this other stuff. I got to find a job someplace." And they said, "No, but that's not what we mean. What are you really going to do?" And I said, "Well, wait a minute. What I just told you." He said, "No, we think you've got to follow through with this idea of this wheelchair. If you don't do it, it's going to die. I mean, no one else is going to pick this up. You've got the passion to get it this far. And we think you ought to start a nonprofit." And, I'm thinking I've lived my life as a nonprofit in a nonprofit mode all this time. And I wasn't going to make the $1 billion that I thought.
The goal that you'd set out to.
Right. But then, Orange County, there's a lot of $1 billion people around Orange County. And
yes, there are.
And some of them started sending money to me just to make more wheelchairs. And, in a letter, Don Schoendorfer, and I open up and here's a little post-it, money for more wheelchairs. And I didn't have any, 501c3. I didn't have anything else on that. I said, so God is this what you want me to do? He said, yes. And then Lori, in so many words, and then Lori, my wife, yes. And then I'm thinking, well, I have PhD, MIT. I got this 25 years of a career that I've been working on cutting edge of many things. And I'm going to start something that I know nothing about. And so I get the book, Nonprofit for Dummies. Because they have them, it's the same.
I didn't know there was one.
Oh yeah, there is, Nonprofit for Dummies. And I'm just going from page to page. They even had a little CD inside that had all your bylaws and your 501c3 application and all this stuff. And I just follow the chapter to chapter.
We all start out that way. Every last one of us that starts a nonprofit, we all start out that way. But now it says I'm unstable. We all start out that way. And I think if we'd known there was a manual, I think most of my people I've interviewed would have bought it as well. I would have bought one too.
Yeah, that was very lucky to have a manual. I know what to do. So that was in 2001, and the coincidences continued to happen. I found funding early on. I put together a board. I found a manufacturer in China for the wheelchairs, and the demand started to grow only by rumor and reputation, so there we were.
So back to the impact question, because now we are 20 or 23 years you've been doing this work. 22 years. Yes. 22 years, which is remarkable. Back to that impact question. I mean, I know from the numbers from seeing your book and reading a little bit about your work, but share with us the numbers of how many wheelchairs you have distributed and some of the impact, and obviously the other impact you think you've made. I mean, because that word, like I said, it's got a lot of facets to it. There's a lot of ways you can describe an impact.
Yes, over these last 22 years, we've given out over 1.3 million wheelchairs in 94 different countries, developing countries. We don't give them away in developed countries, where there's usually options for a wheelchair available to most everybody. But in the developing world, there's no option. If we don't give them a wheelchair, they're going to live their life without one. We've got partners who actually give the wheelchairs away for us. We've learned not to be too smart and try to think we can do it ourselves, because there's all these things that you'd have to know when you're working in a society, the religion, the mores, the social culture, everything else. You've got to know how to do this properly. And so we work through these distribution partners, and we ship them to the closest ocean port, and then they assume possession of them, and they had to take it from there. And we've as far as impact goes, I could start there. The developing partners, the distribution partners, the impact it has on them is profound, because they're usually humanitarian NGO, sometimes faith-based missionaries of all different types of religions, and they don't get a lot of respect in the countries they're working in, for various reasons. But once they get the reputation for wheelchairs, they get tremendous success.
Right.
Because it helps you get reelected if you can show up at a distribution of wheelchairs and you're the mayor or the governor, and you can participate in the distribution. Right. And we let these groups take responsibility and have some responsibility for the distribution. So they are actually helping, and we don't mind letting them take the credit, because that helps our distribution partners. But at first I was focusing on just the individual. There's that woman crawling across the road in Morocco.
Right.
And I didn't see her family, but she probably has one, because there's no way she could keep alive without having a family. And then, after you've given away a few wheelchairs and yourself, I occasionally get out and do this myself, and so does my staff. You see how it impacts the family, because they're the wheelchair.
Because the ripple effect on 1.3 million people times a family of 5 or 10 or whatever it is significant. I mean, it just goes on and on and on.
Yes.
So you started, 22 years ago, not even thinking that, you answered the phone call from the big guy upstairs. You put the plan in motion. You knew that you were doing something great and terrific, but you probably, did you ever dream it could be this big? And if so, are you still dreaming of what's the next dream for your organization?
Yeah, I know. I became very humble in my thinking of where this was all going when it was explained to me that these weren't coincidences. And then I kind of said, okay, well, in that case, why don't I just take the back seat and let God, drive the car? And
Right.
And so that doesn't mean I put my foot in my mouth a lot, and I make mistakes a lot, and we all make mistakes a lot. But basically, I kind of rely on him for the strategic plan and the tactical steps you take. And so I could say, yeah, I'm surprised, but then again, I know what his capacity is, so I'm not surprised, because and I could say, well, I'm disappointed that there's still 73.7 million people needing wheelchairs, but then again, there's a whole lot of stuff going on in the sidelines of this whole process that has to happen, and I hope is working through other people that kind of work on those sides. So one of the biggest problems that we encounter in every country that we've been in is that there's this common feeling that you're cursed, and that's why you've got a disability.
And that's universal. Most of these
yes,
developing countries.
right.
Wow.
Even in the Latin American countries, where Catholicism had such a profound effect in missionary work, but it's real easy to explain a disability by, well, it's a curse. I mean, your parents did something wrong, or your grandparents or something, or you were born to be this way because in your past life, whatever, all this stuff goes on. But the thing is, it's a powerful thing to hear about when everybody around you is saying that you're cursed. It has impact on you.
Right. You begin to believe it.
Yeah. And then you said not only have a physical disability, a mobility disability, but you also have a sort of a sociological, spiritual disability as well, because you're not on the same par with anybody else. And so we've learned that if it's at all possible to get that news out that we don't believe, we have medical reasons to explain what caused this disability. And, they may be very complicated to explain, but besides that, it's not a curse. We don't believe God works.
Nothing that you did. Right.
We don't
nothing
believe
that you did. Right.
Right. And so
go ahead.
That has profound impact when you explain to somebody that you're not cursed, and here's a wheelchair to prove it.
Absolutely. And I can't help but thinking about that 9-year-old boy with the paper route thinking that he couldn't go to college and that maybe he was being cursed by his parents. His older brothers had gone to school. And he took this idea that, no, I'm going to do that. I'm going to school. And you took that information and did something different with it. And the way people take their, whatever you want to call it, I sometimes call it people's trash. You take your trash or your bad news and how you use it. Some people use that as fuel for something and some people don't. And so I think that it's fascinating when people use those messages as fuel for good. So you're definitely one of those. And I think it's pretty impressive, Don. So what life lessons, I can't even imagine what you've seen on this planet in even the past 22 years of the work that you're doing and going into developed countries, the suffering and the poverty and, that just a front row seat to humanity of everything. We're all in this in nonprofit work. We're in the privileged position to see, I think, the best and worst of people sometimes. And I will say when I write my book, that's what it's going to be called, a front row seat to humanity, because that's what I feel like we have someday. And it's a privileged seat to witness some of life's most beautiful things, but it's also hard to see suffering and to see the worst of things, that we do see that as well. So what life lessons have you learned, besides there are no coincidences, since you started this?
Well, the one thing it's people have actually warned me, when you get into a slum in a developing country, be careful, because they're going to want everything they can get from you. And they know you're from, maybe they don't know you're from America, but they know that you're from somewhere else where people are allowed to. And what I find is they're so happy with the life they have. They've learned how to accept the situation, and in this case, it's a fairly dramatic one that they're not going to walk ever again.
Right.
They've given up the hope of anything ever changing. They may have been on list of getting a wheelchair from the government for 30 years or so, who knows, but they just given that up as even hoping for it. And so they've made life to be pleasant and enjoyable, and their family has, and they're all loving each other, and they seem a lot happier than we do.
Well, I can see that.
And that was the prize. And they were so happy to get a wheelchair, they wouldn't dare. I can't believe you would give us anything else. We wouldn't ever want you. Because the way I look at it, the way I explain it to people in this country is, what could I give you, Heidi, for $96 that would change your life forever?
There's nothing that I need.
There's really nothing.
There's nothing that we need, right?
Right.
And most Americans would probably say there's nothing that we need.
Yeah, or they'd
have everything,
or they'd want $1 billion or $5 billion or 100,000 more, or whatever it is that they think that they would need to make their life happier. But these people are already happy, and when you give them a wheelchair, it's profound. It's so profound, and you can just see how hard it is for them to put it in words, how to express their gratitude. That some are just choked up and they can't get the words out. They're just crying and smiling at the same time, and the whole family around them is, we don't have to carry Grandpa anymore. He can go by himself. We can get him outside, and he can see the sun. He can feel the fresh air. He's been living in the back room for 35 years. I mean, we get these stories,
right? And that's how we get paid. That's really what I think of our paydays. It may not be that $1 billion you set out to make, Don, or starting out, but those are our paydays, which are so much greater than any financial payday, when we get to witness that. If there's something just magical that happens when we are in this privileged position to see kindness and the best of the human spirit and the best of giving. And, that's just joy. That's just joy. When you get to be a part of that, it's incredible privilege. So do you think you've changed since you've started all of this? After that phone call, do you think you've changed?
Oh yeah, I have. I mean, and the people I associate with have changed. I'm more associated with people that are in this field of humanitarian, effects. Most of my best friends are in developing countries someplace, and I rarely get the chance to see them.
Oh,
but I always think about them because I mean, these are the people that totally live on faith. They don't know where the next meal is going to come from. And yet if they met somebody who needed a shirt, they would take their shirt off and give it to them. And that's the way they live. And I mean, talk about, the salt of the earth, the people that are out there doing this work. And it's not just in developing countries either, because I know you've been talking about a lot just in the United States. We know there's a lot of things where we can do to make people's life a lot more, pleasant.
right.
Just to know, just for them to know there's a stranger that loves them and is wanting to take care of them, and maybe some little way, it couldn't, maybe not a wheelchair, maybe it's to tie their shoes, something really simple. Why would you get out? Why would you stop and bend over and tie the shoes of somebody who's trying to get some money at the freeway, at the on-ramp to the freeway? Oh, sir, I just want to make sure you don't trip over your shoes. I worry about you. And and you get back in your car. And, wow, isn't that a story?
Right. The power of kindness, and it does. It just changes. It not only changes us, but it changes everything around us. And it has a ripple effect that I think people don't think about. We see so much negativity everywhere in the media and the news. And it's why I love having these conversations, because there's such amazing goodness happening on this earth every second, every day. And no one's talking about it. And to me, Don, you are the hero. You are the people, and everyone who works with you and supports you in your work are the heroes that we should be focusing on. We're focusing on the wrong things in society, and we're not focusing enough on the brilliant people that are using their gifts to make the world better. So I'm so grateful for you and for your story. Please tell us how we can support you, follow you, donate for you, help you, volunteer. How can we support the Free Wheelchair Mission?
Well, there's two things I mentioned in this great discussion we've had that are this is a sticking points for anybody to get behind our Free Wheelchair Mission. And one is 75 million people either crawling on the ground, being carried, or languishing in the back room until they die. And it's pretty much always been that way. Numbers are increasing, but it's so that's a huge number. I mean, I couldn't believe it either. And then until I got into it. And then the second thing, $96, we can get a wheelchair custom designed for off-road developing countries, manufactured, shipped, delivered, assembled, adjusted, and then the training goes in how to use the chair, not only to the individual, but the family or the caretakers for $96. Those two facts will affect some people. And then they'll probably figure out, well, $96, that's a pretty decent Christmas present I could give to somebody, and they'd like it. But even more than that, the person who would get the chair would be, it would change their life. So just getting the story out that we're this organization, we're not going to give up. We've already given out 1.3 million. So clearly we know how to do this. Secondly,
sounds like a great Christmas gift, Don.
Yeah.
This will be just right around Christmas shopping time.
And we even get a Christmas card we'll give the people, and you can pick what continent the wheelchair goes to. And then if you want to give us their email address, we'll tell them when it's shipped, when it's delivered, and we'll give you a picture of not necessarily the person who gets it, but somebody in the village.
Right.
But I noticed you
That's a fantastic thing.
You held up a book. I
know.
wrote.
Well, no one can. It's a podcast. No one can see this, but Don sent me, and his team sent me a wonderful copy of his new book called Miracle Wheels: The Story of a Mission to Bring Mobility to the World. And I have to say, I've only read the first. It just came in the mail, so I haven't gotten to read it all, Don. So forgive me. But I was really excited, as I said to you. The very first chapter, you have a little note that says about you're grateful for anyone that helps you. The most important thing anyone can do for us is to tell our story. And that made me feel very grateful, because I'm really happy that we're able to tell your story today.
So there's that book. Well, it's not wheelchairs. There's so many other things you could do. And what you do is you think about what you're good at. Maybe you get the call from God, or maybe you don't have to get it. And what am I really good at? And is that what I'm doing to help people? Am I using those tools to help people? And, it doesn't have to be that complicated. It could be something like tying somebody's shoes. But, that's one of the most rewarding things about Free Will It's Your Mission is we're connecting people with a way to do something to a stranger that they'll never meet in a developing country. And we're like a bridge. But there's so many things that people in developing countries need. There's so many really talented engineers out here in this country, and people that can get stuff done. And go spend some time in a developing country and look around and ask some people, what do you guys need? Because they don't necessarily need a hospital with all like we need a hospital. They don't need a house like our house. They just need things to improve their life, which we wound up shipping them stuff that we got tired of using 30 years ago. We fill up containers and sending it out to people in developing countries. Like, gee,
and they're so grateful. And they're so grateful. So we can visit freewheelchair.org. We can buy your book. We can think about making our Christmas list for $96 gifts that will change lives. Is there any other way that we can support you, Don? Because what you're doing is really magical.
Yeah, so you can get on our website, freewheelsformission.org, and there's plenty of opportunities. We've learned how to get people involved, even though they don't live in Orange County. There's things that we can do. There's things you can do for mobility. You can get your friends together and you can do something for mobility. You can paddle canoes, you can walk, you can climb, you can hike, you can snowshoe, people are doing all these things as a campaign for mobility. There's ambassadors who will come and locally tell the story of what we're trying to do, and they're not necessarily big financial contributors, but they're good at telling stories, and we're really good at providing the stories for them to tell. And maybe they'd like to come on a trip with us someday and get some of their own stories to tell.
I would like to come on a trip with you one day, because I have to say, there's nothing I love more than A, people doing great work, and B, telling the story of people doing great work, and C, if I get to see the great work, that's an extra bonus. So I would love to join you on one of these excursions one day. And I'm so grateful for you and your time today and sharing your incredible story. And I just am in awe of the message of really finding your gift, figuring out what it is and how to best share it with the world. And you have certainly done that in a really beautiful way. So thank you. Thank you for all of that.
Thank you, Heidi. Thank you for this opportunity to talk.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Charity Matters podcast. I really enjoyed talking to our guest, Don Schoendorfer, about what it takes to start a business that truly changes people's lives. I think his overall humility about his accomplishment was so inspiring. To learn more about modern-day heroes like Don, or if you'd like to reach out to us, visit us at charity-matters.com or connect with us on Instagram at Charity Matters. If you enjoyed our conversation, we would love it if you shared it with your family and friends. And please don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. Remember, together, we can make a difference, one small act of kindness at a time. Charity matters.